I can't marry you. I'm sorry.
He was 3 minutes away from becoming another woman's husband when he looked out the window and saw the only woman he had ever truly loved, standing in the plaza below with two children who had his exact eyes. Kalen So did not faint. He did not cry. He simply set down his champagne glass with the careful precision of a man whose entire universe had just rearranged itself without asking permission, and walked away from his own wedding. If you love powerful stories about hidden secrets, second chances, and billionaires who finally have to face the truth, you are in the right place. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. The people who won't subscribe? They're probably Byung Cheol's cousins. The morning had started with unreasonable optimism. Seoul was performing beautifully, the way Seoul always did when it wanted to make a man feel invincible. The sky above the Grand Hyatt was the particular shade of blue that existed only in October, sharp and clean and indifferent to human drama. The flowers had arrived at 6. The caterers had arrived at 6:30. The string quartet had arrived at 7, slightly offended about the parking situation but otherwise professional. Kalen Seo stood in his bridal suite on the 14th floor and allowed his assistant, Park Jun-ha, to straighten his tie with the focused energy of a man who understood that his job security depended entirely on Kalen's collar lying flat. "You look excellent, sir," Jun-ha said. "I look like a man attending his own execution," Kalen replied pleasantly. Jun-ha chose not to respond to that. It was honestly the most effective skill he had developed in 4 years of employment. Downstairs, 300 guests occupied white-draped chairs in a ballroom that had cost more per square meter to decorate than most Seoul apartments cost to own. Kalen's mother, Madame Seo Hyunja, sat in the front row wearing a cream hanbok and an expression that suggested she had already mentally planned the grandchildren's school enrollment. His uncle, Seo Byung-chol, stood near the back with a glass of water and the satisfied smile of a man watching a chess piece move exactly where he had always intended. The bride, Shin Ji-yeon, was reportedly calm, beautiful, and completely unaware that the man she was about to marry had never once used her name in a sentence that also contained the word love. This was not Ji-yeon's fault. She was kind and accomplished and deserved considerably better than a man who had outsourced his heart to a spreadsheet 5 years ago and forgotten to retrieve it. But arrangements had been made, agreements had been signed. The CEO board approved of the union with the enthusiasm of people who understood that a stable marriage meant stable quarterly projections. Kalen understood all of this. He had accepted all of this. He had told himself, standing in front of his bathroom mirror at 7:45 that morning, that a man his age did not chase ghosts. A man his age did not spend his wedding morning thinking about a woman who had sat across from his competitor in a Paris restaurant and smiled like the documents between them were ordinary conversation. A man his age moved forward. He was very good at moving forward. It was the only direction he had practiced. He was reaching for his jacket when he made the single small mistake that dismantled everything. He looked out the window. It was not intentional. It was the most ordinary glance, a brief, directionless gaze toward the plaza below, where Seoul went about its Saturday morning without any awareness that a billionaire above it was making his peace with the loveless future. And there she was. Mira Barnabas stood at the edge of the plaza with the posture of a woman who carried her own architecture everywhere she went, spine straight, chin slightly lifted, dressed in a deep terracotta coat that made the gray morning look like it had been arranged specifically around her. She was looking down at a child beside her, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder. A boy. And then Kalen's gaze moved, because it had to, because the universe did not do things by half measures, and he saw the girl standing on Mira's other side. Twins. 5 years old, perhaps. Small and neat, and perfectly still in the way of children who have been loved into confidence. The boy looked up at the Grand Hyatt's balloon arrangements with open curiosity, and across 14 floors of glass and October air, Kalen Seo saw his own eyes in a child's face and felt 5 years of mathematics arrive in his chest like freight. He counted. He stood there in his wedding suit, in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, and he counted. 5 years ago, the divorce, the 8 weeks he hadn't known about, the cold Thursday, the coat too thin for the weather. The math was not complicated. It was simply devastating. "Sir?" Jun-ha said carefully. He had learned to recognize this particular quality of silence. Kalen set down his champagne glass. He set it down so gently that it made no sound at all against the marble table. The way a man sets something down when he is concentrating every available unit of self-control on not completely unraveling in front of an employee. Cancel the wedding, Kalen said. Junha blinked. I'm sorry? Cancel the wedding. He reached for his jacket. Apologize to Jiyeon. Give her the Jeju property. She mentioned once she liked the view. And get me downstairs in the next 90 seconds. Sir, there are 300. Junha. Kalen looked at him with the calm of a man who had already made his decision so completely that argument was simply weather. 90 seconds. He was in the elevator in 45. In the ballroom, the string quartet played on for another 3 minutes before anyone realized that the groom was not coming back from the bathroom. By the time the whispers started, by the time Madame Seo Hyunja's expression shifted from serene to dangerous, and Byung-cheol's water glass paused halfway to his lips, Kalen was already crossing the lobby at the particular pace of a man who has stopped performing patience. The plaza doors opened. Seoul air hit him, cold and clean, and carrying the faint smell of chrysanthemums from a vendor at the corner. He walked out into the ordinary Saturday morning that had been waiting for him all along. He walked toward the woman who had signed his divorce papers without explaining why and spent 5 years raising proof that he had been wrong about everything. Mira turned before he reached her, as if she felt the shift in air pressure that followed him everywhere. Her face went completely still, not frightened, not guilty. The face of a woman who had spent 5 years quietly preparing for a conversation that had arrived at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible way, wearing a tuxedo. Mira, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the Grand Hyatt entrance behind him, at the balloons, at his suit. You're getting married today, she said. I was, Kalen replied. The little boy tugged at Mira's coat and looked up at the stranger in the expensive suit with the calm, evaluating gaze of a child who has learned to read adults carefully. The little girl pressed slightly closer to her mother's side without making a sound. Kalen looked at them both and felt something fracture very quietly somewhere behind his ribs. How old are they? He asked. Mira's jaw tightened. Kalen. How old, Mira? A pause that lasted exactly long enough to confirm everything the mathematics had already told him. 5, she said. The plaza hummed around them. Seoul went on being Seoul. Traffic and vendors and a couple taking photographs by the fountain, entirely unbothered by the fact that a man's entire understanding of the last 5 years was being quietly demolished in their peripheral vision. Kalen crouched down to eye level with the boy. What's your name? He asked quietly. The boy studied him with those familiar eyes, precise, steady, unafraid. Noah, he said. Kalen nodded slowly. He looked at the girl. Lena, she offered before he could ask. Quieter than her brother, but watching him with the same careful attention. He stood up. He looked at Mira, really looked at her for the first time in 5 years, and saw what the intervening years had deposited in her face. Not age exactly. Resolve. The particular expression of a woman who had carried something heavy for a very long time and refused to let anyone see her adjust the weight. We need to talk, he said. We needed to talk 5 years ago, Mira replied. You chose paperwork instead. That landed where she intended it to. He deserved it. I know, he said simply. And perhaps it was those 2 words. Unqualified, undefended, arriving without the armor he had worn every other time he'd spoken in the last decade. That made Mira's expression shift, just slightly, into something that was not yet forgiveness but was at least the door beside it. Above them, on the 14th floor, Junha was on his 3rd apologetic phone call. In the ballroom, 300 guests were beginning to understand that the refreshments were now the main event. And on a plaza in Seoul on an October Saturday, a man who had built his life on the premise that he never made mistakes finally stood still long enough to count the cost of the one he had. In that ballroom, So Byung-chol was still holding his water glass, and for the first time in 15 years of careful planning, he was afraid. If you believe a man who destroys a family to protect his inheritance deserves what's coming to him, stay with us. Drop a comment below. Whose side are you on? Because this story is only getting started, and justice has a way of arriving dressed in the last thing you expected. The Grand Hyatt Seoul had hosted divorces, hostile takeovers, and one extremely memorable incident involving a K-pop idol and a stolen dessert cart. But in its 40-year history, it had never hosted a wedding cancellation of this particular magnitude. The kind where the groom walked out mid-morning with the calm of a man checking his mail, leaving 300 guests, a string quartet, and one very confused florist to collectively process what had just happened. Inside the ballroom, the processing was not going well. Shin Jian sat in the bridal anteroom with the stillness of a woman who had decided, in the last 10 minutes, that crying in public was something she would simply not be doing. Her maid of honor, Park So-ra, hovered nearby with a glass of water, and the expression of someone who had run completely out of reassuring things to say and was now simply providing hydration as a substitute for wisdom. He left, Jian said for the third time. Not with devastation, more with the tone of a scientist observing an unexpected result. He left, So-ra confirmed, because there was nothing else to confirm. Jian set down her bouquet with the precision of a woman mentally rearranging her 5-year plan. She was, at her core, a practical person. It was the quality that had made her the youngest female partner at her consulting firm, and the quality that was right now preventing her from throwing the bouquet directly through the window. The Jeju property, she said quietly. So-ra blinked. I'm sorry? His assistant mentioned a Jeju property. Ji-yeon smoothed her dress with one hand. Oceanfront, I assume. That is at minimum a reasonable consolation for public humiliation on a Saturday morning. So-ra stared at her for a long moment. You are either the most composed person I have ever met, or you are in shock. Both, Ji-yeon said serenely. Get me the assistant's number. Outside, Kaylin was discovering that 5 years of conversation could not be compressed into a plaza. Mira had agreed to nothing. She had not agreed to explanations, reconciliations, or extended eye contact. What she had agreed to after a long pause and a glance at Noah and Lena was coffee, the kind of agreement that meant I will give you 20 minutes and the rest depends entirely on your behavior. They sat at a corner table in the hotel cafe, which was aggressively decorated for autumn and staffed by a young barista who recognized Kaylin Seo from a magazine cover and was performing very hard at appearing not to recognize him. The twins sat side by side across from Kaylin, sharing a slice of banana cake with the cooperative efficiency of children who had long ago established a fair division of labor. Kaylin could not stop looking at them. This was, he understood, slightly unnerving for everyone involved. He was attempting to reconcile the fact that two human beings who shared his bone structure had existed on this planet for 5 years without his knowledge, had learned to walk, developed opinions, acquired favorite foods, while he had been across the world attending quarterly reviews and telling himself he was fine. He was, it turned out, extremely not fine. Stop staring, Mira said quietly without looking up from her coffee. I'm not staring. You are cataloging, she corrected. It is the same face you made when you first saw the cultural center blueprints, like you're memorizing the structure. He had forgotten she could do that. Read him with the precision of a woman who had studied his expressions the way she studied floor plans. He had spent 5 years constructing walls, and she had walked past them in 30 seconds simply by paying attention. Mira. He leaned forward slightly. The envelope, her hand stilled around her cup. He had seen it from the window. When she had reached into her bag in the plaza, partly to compose herself, partly from a reflex she probably didn't realize she had, her fingers had brushed past a sealed envelope that she'd quickly covered. He had the eyes of a man trained to notice things other people assumed were invisible. We are not doing this here, she said. Then tell me where. Kaylin, I canceled my wedding, he said, not as leverage, simply as a statement of reality. I canceled 300 guests, a catering contract, and approximately 40 years of my mother's expectations. I am asking you for a conversation. Mira looked at him for a long moment. Noah, without looking up from his cake, said matter-of-factly, Mama keeps the envelope in the inside pocket. She checks it sometimes when she thinks we're sleeping. Silence descended on the table. Mira closed her eyes briefly. Lena patted her brother's arm with the expression of a child who had learned, earlier than most, that some information was better kept private. Thank you, Noah, Mira said, with the careful tone of a woman who was simultaneously proud of her son's observational skills and deeply inconvenienced by them. Kaylin looked at the boy with something that might, in another lifetime, have been called pride. Smart kid, he said quietly. He gets it from me, Mira replied immediately. Of course. Another silence, shorter this time, and carrying a different texture. The faint outline of something that had once been comfortable between them, buried under 5 years of distance but apparently not destroyed. Mira reached into her bag. She placed the envelope on the table between them. Aged slightly at the edges, sealed still, with a quality of having been handled many times without being opened. The way people touch things they are not yet ready to use. I received this the night I signed the papers, she said. I don't know who delivered it. I know what's inside because I opened it once, the week after I arrived in Dakar. She paused. I have never used it. I kept it because I needed to know that what happened to us had a reason, even if the reason was something I couldn't prove. Kalen looked at the envelope, then at her. May I? He asked. It was the first time in their entire acquaintance that he had asked her permission for something before taking it. She noticed. He saw her notice. She nodded once. He opened it. And somewhere across the hotel, in the now emptying ballroom, Seo Byung-cheol checked his phone, found no messages from the groom, and felt the first cold thread of genuine concern move through him. The specific discomfort of a man whose carefully constructed architecture was developing an unscheduled crack. Kalen's hands were steady as he read, but his jaw was doing something it had never done in any boardroom, any negotiation, any crisis in 20 years of building an empire. It was trembling. The document was 3 pages long. Kalen read it once at normal speed. Then he read it again slowly. The way he read contracts when he suspected something buried in the language was designed to rearrange his life. Then he set it down on the cafe table with the careful stillness of a man who had just discovered that the foundation of a building he'd been living in for 5 years was made entirely of sand. The photographs, the anonymous email, the clinical Korean caption. The precise timing, arriving the exact night Mira had returned from Paris before she'd had the chance to explain anything. All of it, orchestrated, documented, and signed in the kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who had sat at Kalen's father's funeral and wept with convincing sincerity. Seo Byung-cheol. Kalen sat very still for a very long time. This was, for people who knew him, more alarming than shouting. Kalen Seo in motion was predictable, decisive, efficient, controlled. Kalen Seo, completely motionless, was the human equivalent of a pressure system that had stopped moving. Meteorologists knew what that meant. It meant something very large was about to happen. Mira watched him with the expression of a woman who had rehearsed this moment many times in her head and discovered, now that it was actually occurring, that none of her rehearsals had quite captured the weight of it. Say something, she said quietly. I'm thinking. You've been thinking for 4 minutes. It's a complicated thought. Noah looked up from the remaining corner of banana cake and studied Kalen's face with the frank assessment of a child who had not yet learned to pretend he wasn't watching. Your eye is doing something, he observed. Noah, Mira said. It's twitching, Noah clarified helpfully. I see that. We don't comment. Why not? Because some adults need silence when they are processing difficult information. Noah considered this with genuine seriousness. Like when you read Uncle Tierno's messages and then go stand on the balcony for a while? Lena placed her small hand over her brother's and shook her head once, with the world-weary patience of a 5-year-old who had accepted that she would spend most of her life managing him. Under different circumstances, Kalen might have smiled. Instead, he picked up the document again and looked at the signature at the bottom of page 3. The same signature he had watched his uncle place on board resolutions, family trusts, charitable donations. The careful, slightly theatrical flourish of a man who understood that how you signed your name was a statement of character. Byung-chol had signed his own betrayal with his usual flourish. There was something almost admirably arrogant about that. He used Yoon Dae-jung, Kalen said. His voice came out quieter than intended, the specific quiet of something that had burned down to its base temperature. Yoon had been trying to acquire the Incheon development rights for 2 years. Byung-chol gave him access to me through you. Yoon staged the photographs. In exchange, he looked at the second page. In exchange for a 12% stake in the Incheon deal once I was removed from the succession picture. Mira nodded slowly. That's what I understood. And you kept this for 5 years. I kept it, she said, with a precision that suggested she had chosen every word in this sentence long before today. Because I was alone, in a foreign country, 8 weeks pregnant, with evidence against one of the most powerful families in Korea. She met his eyes steadily. I kept it because using it meant starting a war I wasn't equipped to fight, and I had 2 people to protect who were more important than winning. The cafe hummed quietly around them. The barista had developed a sudden urgent need to reorganize the pastry display on the far side of the room. Kalen looked at his children. The words still arrived in his chest like something being assembled for the first time. Unfamiliar machinery clicking into configuration he hadn't known his body was designed to hold. Noah had finished the cake and was now constructing something architectural with the wooden stirrers from their coffee cups. Lena was watching him do it with the focused attention of a structural critic. That one will fall, Lena said quietly, pointing at Noah's construction. It won't, Noah said. The base isn't wide enough. I'm going to add another layer. Adding height to an unstable base makes it worse, not better. Kaylin blinked. Mira noticed his expression and something in her face softened almost imperceptibly. She's been like that since she was 3, she said. Points out load-bearing problems in everything. Furniture, sandcastles, her brother's ambitions. She sounds like an architect, Kaylin said. She sounds like her mother, Mira replied. Then, as if she hadn't intended to say something that gentle, she looked back at her coffee. Kaylin folded the document carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, the same jacket he had put on 2 hours ago, believing it would get him through a wedding ceremony. It was doing considerably different work now. I need to deal with Byung-chul, he said. I know. Today, I assumed. He's still in the hotel. Mira looked up sharply. Kaylin, I'm not going to do anything dramatic, he said, with the tone of a man who was absolutely going to do something dramatic but wanted the record to reflect otherwise. I simply intend to have a conversation with my uncle in which I present him with information he believed no longer existed. And then I'm going to watch his face. Mira studied him for a moment. You built an empire by reading people's faces. One of my more useful skills. Don't let him see the document first. Let him think you're bluffing. He'll reveal more trying to dismiss something he doesn't know you can prove. Kaylin looked at her. That's exactly what I was going to do. I know, she said. I designed buildings with you for 14 months. I know how you move before you move. The air between them shifted, briefly, carefully, into something that was not quite the past and not yet the future. A narrow bridge between two people who had once known each other completely and were now carefully testing whether the structure still held. Then Mira's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression changed. What? Kaylin asked. She turned the screen toward him. A news alert. Seoul's largest entertainment news platform, timestamp from 11 minutes ago. Breaking. So Kaylin abandons wedding at Grand Hyatt, seen in plaza with unknown woman and 2 children. Sources inside ballroom confirm groom left without explanation. Below the headline, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was a photograph taken from somewhere above the plaza. The 2 of them, the twins between them, the morning light. Someone had been watching from the moment he walked out the door. Kaylin's jaw set. Mira looked at him with eyes that said, I told you this would be complicated, without using any of those words. And somewhere upstairs, Seo Byung-chul read the same alert on his phone, set his water glass down on a ballroom table, and began making the first of several very quiet, very urgent phone calls. The ballroom had the particular atmosphere of a party that had forgotten its reason for existing. 300 guests occupied their seats with the uncomfortable energy of people who had dressed formally for an occasion that had dissolved beneath them and weren't sure whether leaving now constituted rudeness or self-preservation. The catering staff moved through the room with professional determination, refilling glasses with the quiet heroism of people who understood that their job description had not technically changed just because the groom had evaporated. Madame So Hyunja had not moved from the front row. This was, to anyone who knew her, the most alarming development of the morning. Hyunja in motion was manageable. She redirected, she commanded, she restructured situations with the efficiency of someone who had spent 40 years ensuring that the Seo family's public face never developed so much as a wrinkle. Hyunja, completely still, was a different proposition entirely. It meant she was not reacting. It meant she was calculating. Her personal assistant, a young woman named Cho Yeri, stood 2 respectful steps behind her and breathed as quietly as possible. Find him, Hyunja said, without turning around. I've tried his phone 4 times. I did not ask you to call him, Yeri. I asked you to find him. There is a difference between technology and results. Go and produce a result. Yeri went. Byung-chul appeared at Hyunja's elbow approximately 90 seconds later, materializing with the smooth availability of a man who had been nearby and listening the entire time. Sister, he said gently, settling into the chair beside her with the practiced grief of a supporting actor who had rehearsed this scene. This is a difficult morning, but Kaylin is young. Sometimes men feel pressure before. Byung-chul. Hyunja's voice was pleasant the way very cold water was pleasant, clarifying and slightly dangerous. My son did not leave because of pressure. My son left because he saw something in that plaza. She paused. I would like to know what he saw. A beat. Brief enough that most people would have missed it. Byung-chul did not miss it. He was the one who had created it. I'm sure it was nothing, he said smoothly. Hyunja turned and looked at her brother-in-law for a long moment with the expression of a woman filing information away in a place she would return to later. Of course, she said. Kaylin found his uncle in the hallway outside the ballroom at 12:43. heading toward the elevator with the purposeful stride of a man going somewhere that was not, in fact, where he appeared to be going. Byung-cheol was good at that, the performance of direction, the implication of legitimate destination. "Uncle," Kalen said. Byung-cheol turned with an expression of relief so well constructed it deserved a frame. "Kalen, thank goodness, your mother is." "Walk with me," Kalen said. It was not a request. Byung-cheol recognized the tone, had heard it in Kalen's father's voice many times, in the years before the older man's death, and fell into step beside his nephew with the smooth compliance of a man who had learned that resistance drew more attention than cooperation. Kalen led him to a smaller meeting room off the main corridor. Glass-walled, currently empty, visible from the hallway, but not audible through it. He held the door open with the courtesy of a man who understood that the most unsettling thing he could do right now was remain polite. Byung-cheol walked in. Kalen closed the door. "You gave a wonderful toast this morning," Kalen said, moving to the window and looking out at the city below, hands in his pockets, voice entirely conversational. "The part about family loyalty was particularly moving. I noticed you made eye contact with the board members during that section." "I meant every word," Byung-cheol said warmly. "Family is everything, too. Yoon Dae-jung sends his regards, by the way." Silence. Not long silence. Byung-cheol was too skilled for long silence. But the half-second gap, the barely perceptible recalibration, was exactly what Kalen had been waiting for. Mira had been right. Let him think it was a bluff. Watch what he reaches for. "I'm not sure I follow," Byung-cheol said with a light laugh. "Of course not." Kalen turned from the window. His expression was calm in the specific way of deep water, nothing visible on the surface, everything moving underneath. It was 5 years ago. These things blur. "Kalen, if this is about the woman in the plaza—" "Her name is Mira," Kalen said, quietly, precisely, the way you correct someone who has mispronounced something important. "Her name is Mira Barnabas. She was my wife. You remember her, I'm sure. You had her photographed in Paris." Byung-cheol's face performed concern. It was a masterful performance. The slight furrow, the careful blankness, the readiness to express confusion on demand. He had a face that had spent decades in the service of misdirection. "I don't know what someone has told you, but 12%, Kalen said. A pause. "That was your arrangement with Yoon. 12% of the Incheon development rights in exchange for staging the photographs and delivering them to my private email." Kalen tilted his head slightly. "My private email, Byung-cheol. The one with access restrictions that existed only for senior board members and immediate family." The concern on Byung-cheol's face was doing complicated things now, trying to maintain its shape while the architecture beneath it shifted. "You're upset about this morning," he said carefully. "You've seen this woman again, and old feelings are—" "She kept the instructions," Kalen said. The room went quiet in a different way. "I beg your pardon?" "The original coordination documents, the photograph brief, the communication between you and Yoon's assistant outlining the setup, the timing, and the compensation structure." Kalen reached into his jacket pocket and produced not the document itself, Mira had the document, but a folded piece of paper, blank inside, because the most effective thing about a bluff was that the other person's imagination always filled it with exactly the right content. She received a copy the night she signed the divorce papers. She has kept it for 5 years. Byung-cheol stared at the folded paper, and Kalen, who had built an empire by reading faces, watched his uncle's expression move through 3 distinct phases in the space of 4 seconds. Disbelief, recalculation, and finally, beneath the practiced composure, the cold recognition of a man who understood that something he had considered safely buried had just walked back into the light. It was all Kalen needed. "I have 2 children," Kalen said. His voice shifted, not louder, but different. The way a building changes when you understand its true dimensions. "A son and a daughter, 5 years old. They have been alive on this planet for 5 years because you decided that the CO inheritance was more important than my marriage." He paused. "I would like you to think carefully about what you say next, not for your sake, simply because I want whatever you say to be accurate, since I intend to remember it precisely." Byung-cheol was quiet for the first time since Kalen had known him. Then, with the slow adjustment of a man accepting new weather, "What do you want? Today, nothing from you." Kalen picked up the blank paper and returned it to his pocket. "Today I have more important things to attend to, but I want you to spend the afternoon considering the following. Everything you built on the assumption that I would never find out is currently being reviewed. He moved toward the door. Enjoy the catering. I'm told the appetizers are excellent. He left Byung-chul standing in the glass-walled room, visible to the entire corridor, with the expression of a man who had just discovered that the chess piece he'd moved 15 years ago had quietly learned to play the game. Downstairs, Mira was helping Lena put her coat back on when her phone rang. Unknown number, Seoul area code. She answered. Miss Barnabas. The voice was measured, precise, and female. My name is Seo Hyunja. I believe we have not met. I think it is time that we did. Mira went very still. Lena looked up at her mother's face, and, with the instinct of a child who had learned to read atmospheres, reached up and took her hand. There were exactly 3 people in the world who made Mira Barnabas genuinely nervous. Her grandmother in Dakar, who could communicate disappointment through a single look at 40 meters. Her structural engineering professor at university, who had once returned her thesis with the single annotation "try again" written in red across the cover page. And apparently, effective immediately, Seo Hyunja, a woman she had never met, whose voice on the phone contained the particular quality of someone who had never once in her life needed to raise it to be obeyed. I'm at the hotel cafe, Mira said carefully. I know, Hyunja replied. I'll come to you. The line ended. Mira looked at her phone for a moment, then at her children, then at the middle distance, in the manner of someone rapidly assembling their emotional infrastructure before an incoming weather event. Who was that? Noah asked. Someone important. More important than the man in the suit? Different kind of important. Noah processed this with a small nod, accepting the hierarchy without requiring further explanation. Lena was still holding Mira's hand and had not released it, which Mira chose to interpret as solidarity rather than anxiety, because she needed at least one of them to be calm, and it was clearly not going to be her. She ordered another coffee she didn't need and waited. Seo Hyunja arrived 8 minutes later. She was a small woman, the kind of small that somehow occupied more space than people twice her size. She wore her cream hanbok with the ease of someone who had never once in 40 years felt underdressed, and she moved through the hotel cafe with the unhurried authority of a woman who understood that rooms adjusted themselves to her presence, not the other way around. She stopped at the table. She looked at Mira. Then she looked at the twins with the careful, precise attention of a jeweler examining stones she had not expected to find. Noah looked back at her with open curiosity. Lena moved approximately 3 centimeters closer to her mother. Yunya sat down. She did not wait to be invited. She folded her hands on the table and looked at Mira with an expression that contained, in careful layers, several things simultaneously: assessment, grief, something that might have been guilt, and beneath all of it, the fragile and heavily armored thing that powerful women carried when they encountered evidence of their own failures. You are more composed than I expected, Hyunja said. I've had 5 years to prepare, Mira replied. That is fair. A pause. May I ask their names? Mira held her gaze for a moment. Then, Noah and Lena. Hyunja looked at the boy, then the girl. Something moved through her face briefly, crossing it the way weather crosses a landscape, present and then gone, but leaving the ground changed. They look like him, she said quietly, like Kaylin at that age. She paused. And like you, the jaw, the way they sit. She said it without performance, the way people state things they are simply observing, because the truth of them is too plain to dress up. Mira said nothing. I owe you an apology, Hyunja said. This was, apparently, not what Mira had expected. Her coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. I don't say that easily, Hyunja continued, with the tone of someone who was, in fact, finding it quite difficult and had decided that the difficulty was irrelevant. I did not arrange what Boyoung-chol did, but I created conditions in which a man like him could operate unquestioned for 15 years. I valued family reputation above family truth. And you, she stopped, resumed. You left my son's house carrying children I didn't know existed, and I never once asked why the divorce had happened so quickly. I accepted the version I was given because it was convenient. The cafe hummed around them, indifferent to the excavation happening at table 7. Why are you telling me this? Mira asked. Because Kaylin will come back to this table, Hyunja said simply. And when he does, I don't want him to find that his mother spent the morning managing the situation instead of acknowledging it. She paused. I am 61 years old. I have managed enough situations. This one deserves something more honest. Mira set her cup down. She looked at this woman, her ex-mother-in-law. Technically, the mother of the man who had signed her divorce papers without waiting 48 hours, and felt the complicated architecture of 5 years' worth of careful anger develop an unexpected structural problem. It was very difficult to maintain a clean, load-bearing resentment when the person you had assigned it to was sitting across from you dismantling their own defenses voluntarily. He didn't wait, Mira said, not with heat, simply with the flatness of a fact that had been true for a long time. I asked him for 48 hours. He filed within a week. I know. I was pregnant. I know that now. If I had told him, Mira paused, choosing her words with the precision of someone who had rebuilt this sentence many times. If I had told him about the pregnancy and he had chosen to believe the photographs anyway, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering whether he stayed for me or for obligation. I wasn't willing to find that out. Hyunja was quiet for a moment. That, she said carefully, is either the most self-protective decision I have ever heard or the bravest. I haven't decided which. It's both, Mira said. Most real decisions are. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable exactly, the silence of two intelligent women recalibrating. Noah, who had been building another stirrer construction and monitoring the adult conversation with one ear, chose this moment to look up at Hyunja and say, "Are you Kaylin's mother?" Hyunja blinked. "I am." "He has the same eyes as us," Noah said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of a child stating something he had clearly already filed under solved problems. Lena noticed first, but I agreed. Lena, for her part, was examining Hyunja with the quiet focus she applied to structural assessments. "Your earrings are heavy," she said finally. "They're pulling the left one down more than the right." Hyunja reached up and touched her left ear instinctively. Lena was correct. Something shifted in Hyunja's expression, cracked open slightly, the way very controlled faces sometimes did when children said something unexpectedly true. She looked at Lena for a long moment with the expression of a woman encountering something she had not budgeted for emotionally. "She's very observant," Hyunja said softly. "She's been like that since she could focus her eyes," Mira said. There was warmth in her voice that arrived without permission, the involuntary warmth of a mother who could not discuss her children without it. Hyunja straightened her left earring. Then she looked at Mira with the direct gaze of someone who had finished with preamble. "What do you need?" she asked. "Not what Kaylin needs. Not what the family needs. What do you need to feel safe enough to stay in this city long enough to allow something to be repaired?" Mira looked at her steadily. "I need to know that the people who designed my disappearance from this family are held accountable, not quietly managed, accountable." Byung-chul. "And Yoon Dae-young?" Hyunja nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of a woman closing a door on something she had left open too long. "That I can promise you." "Promises from this family," Mira said carefully, "have a complicated history." "Yes," Hyunja agreed. "They do. I am aware of that. I am asking you to extend credit I have not yet earned." A pause. "I am also aware that is an uncomfortable thing to ask." The door of the cafe opened. Kaylin walked in, jacket still immaculate, expression carrying the particular controlled energy of a man who had just done something significant and was moving immediately to the next thing, because stopping to feel it was not yet on the schedule. He saw his mother at the table. He stopped. He looked from Hyunja to Mira to the twins and back to his mother with an expression that moved through surprise, wariness, and something more complicated in approximately 2 seconds. Hyunja looked at her son. "Sit down, Kaylin. You called her," he said. "I introduced myself, yes. Mother. Sit down." He sat. Because some things were simply still true regardless of how many billions you managed. Noah looked at the 3 adults around the table with the calm assessment of a child who had decided this was interesting. "Are we having lunch?" he asked. A beat passed around the table. Then, unexpectedly, Mira laughed, brief and genuine, the kind that arrived before a person could decide whether the moment deserved it. Kaylin looked at her. And for the first time since the plaza, something in his face released slightly, like a building settling into its foundations. "Yes," Hyunja said, with the decisive authority of a woman who had just found her footing. She signaled the barista with a single raised hand. "We are having lunch." Across the hotel, Seo Byung-chul was making his 4th phone call in 20 minutes, trying to reach Yoon Dae-jung. Yoon was not answering. This was because Yoon Dae-jung was currently looking at the same news alert everyone else had seen, and understanding, with the slow horror of a man watching a tide come in, that the sealed envelope he'd assumed was long destroyed had just walked back into Seoul. Lunch at the Grand Hyatt Seoul on the day of a cancelled wedding was, culinarily speaking, excellent. Emotionally speaking, it was one of the most structurally complex meals any of the participants had ever attempted, which was saying something, given that one of them designed buildings for a living, one of them ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and one of them was Seo Hyun-ja, who had once mediated a hostile board takeover between two men who genuinely hated each other while eating a four-course dinner without spilling anything. The twins, mercifully, were not complicated. Noah ate with the focused dedication of a small person who took food seriously. Lena arranged her rice into a precise quadrant system that she appeared to find deeply satisfying. Neither of them required emotional management, which freed up considerable bandwidth for the three adults who did. Kaylin sat across from Mira. Hyunja sat at the head of the table in the way that people who are naturally at the head of things always manage to arrange themselves without appearing to try. Conversation moved carefully. The way people moved through rooms they weren't certain were structurally sound. Then Kalen's phone lit up. He glanced at it. His jaw tightened. "What?" Mira asked. She had always been able to read his jaw. He turned the screen toward her. A message from Park Jun-ha, his assistant, sent from somewhere inside the hotel. "Sir, Yoon Dae-jung is in the building. Arrived through the service entrance approximately 15 minutes ago. Currently in Mr. Byung-cheol's suite on the 9th floor. I thought you should know. Also, I've spoken with Ms. Ji-yeon's representative regarding the Jeju property. She says thank you and that she hopes you find whatever you were clearly looking for." Mira read the message twice. "Yoon is here. Apparently Byung-chol called for reinforcements," Kaylin said. "Or Yoon came because he saw the news alert and panicked. Both can be true." Hyunja, who had read the message from her peripheral vision with the practiced skill of a woman who had spent 4 decades sitting at tables where information was being deliberately withheld from her, set down her chopsticks with a precise click. "Yoon Dae-jung," she said, with the tone of someone identifying a particular variety of pest. "He has been trying to acquire So Group's Northern Development portfolio for 3 years. He sent orchids to our company anniversary dinner last year. I always found that presumptuous." She paused. "I would like to know what they are discussing on the 9th floor." "You're not going up there," Kaylin said immediately. "I wasn't suggesting I would go personally, Kaylin. I'm 61, not retired." She looked at him with the measured patience of a woman who had been having this particular genre of conversation with her son for 30 years. "I was suggesting that your assistant, who appears to be considerably more resourceful than his salary suggests, might find a way to be nearby." Kaylin looked at his phone, typed 3 words to Jun-ha. "Stay close. Listen." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Already am. Also, I ordered you a dessert. You look like you need it." On the 9th floor, the conversation in Byung-cheol's suite was not going well for either of its participants. Yoon Dae-jung was a compact man in his mid-50s who wore expensive suits the way people wore armor, deliberately, with an awareness of the protection they implied. He had built his development company on a combination of genuine talent and strategic ruthlessness, and he had spent the last 5 years believing, with reasonable confidence, that the CO chapter of his past was permanently closed. The news alert had reopened it with considerable violence. "You told me the woman was gone," Yoon said, standing at the window with his back to the room, looking out at the city below. "You told me she had left Korea with nothing, that she had no interest in the past." "She had no interest in the past," Byung-chol said, with the strained composure of a man maintaining a performance in an increasingly empty theater. "Apparently the past developed an interest in her. There was an envelope. I'm aware. You told me the envelope. I told you it had been handled," Byung-chol said. There was an edge in his voice now, the first crack in the smooth surface, the sound of a man who had spent decades managing outcomes encountering one that had declined to be managed. "I believed it had been handled. Obviously something was missed." Yoon turned from the window. "Something was missed," he repeated, with the careful enunciation of a man who wanted to ensure that the absurdity of that sentence was fully documented. "A document with my involvement in a fraudulent setup against the head of So Group International was not handled. And now the man's ex-wife is sitting in the hotel cafe downstairs with his children and his mother, while the entire Korean entertainment press has photographs of the reunion." He paused. "You're describing this as something was missed." "I'm describing it as a situation that requires management." "What it requires," Yoon said, lowering his voice to the register that people used when they wanted to be taken seriously and didn't trust volume to accomplish it, "is a resolution. Today. Before Kalen So decides to do something irreversible with whatever he has in his possession." "He may be bluffing," Byung-cheol said. "He canceled his own wedding on the morning of the ceremony because he saw a woman in a plaza. Yoon looked at him steadily. Does that sound like a man who bluffs? A silence that answered the question without requiring words. I need to speak with him, Yoon said. That is an extraordinarily bad idea. I need to speak with him, Yoon repeated, because the alternative is waiting for him to come to me, and I would prefer to control the terms of that conversation. He straightened his jacket. Arrange it. Downstairs, Kaylin's phone vibrated. Junha, they're coming down. Yoon wants a meeting. Byung-chul is trying to talk him out of it. Yoon is not being talked out of it. ETA approximately 4 minutes. Also, the dessert is a chocolate fondant. I took the liberty. Kaylin set the phone face down on the table. They're coming down, he said. Mira looked at him steadily. Both of them? Yoon's idea, apparently. Hyunja unfolded her napkin and placed it beside her plate with the deliberate ceremony of a woman preparing to engage. How interesting, she said. He wants to negotiate. He wants to assess, Kaylin said. He wants to see what I actually have before he decides how to respond to it. Then we give him nothing to read, Mira said. Both Kaylin and Hyunja looked at her. I spent 14 months designing structures with your company, she said to Kaylin. I know how So Group operates in negotiations. You apply pressure until the other party reveals their position. Yoon knows that. He'll be watching your face the moment he walks in. She paused. So don't let him walk into your face. Let him walk into mine. Kaylin was quiet for a moment. You want to be the one who speaks to him. I want to be the one who is holding the envelope when he arrives, Mira said. Because he knows I have it. And he doesn't know what I've decided to do with it. I've had 5 years of patience. He's had about 40 minutes of panic. She looked at Kaylin with a steadiness that had been built by years of doing hard things alone. Those are very different energy levels. I know which one negotiates better. Hyunja looked at her son with an expression that said without words, this is who you divorced. Kaylin had the grace to look like he understood the weight of that. All right, he said. Mira reached into her bag and placed the envelope on the table in front of her. Then she adjusted Lena's collar, checked that Noah's water glass was full, and sat back with the composed authority of a woman who had built entire skylines from nothing and was not remotely intimidated by a man in an expensive suit who had made the catastrophic error of underestimating her 5 years ago. The cafe door opened. Yoon Dae-jung walked in. He scanned the room in the practiced way of men who had learned to locate exits and power simultaneously. His gaze found Kaylin, then moved to Hyunja, then settled with visible recalibration on Mira, on the envelope in front of her, on the 2 children quietly eating beside her, and on the expression of a woman who had been waiting, patiently and without urgency, for exactly this moment. Whatever speech Yoon had prepared on the elevator ride down, it did not survive contact with that expression. He stopped 3 feet from the table. The color in his face made a quiet, strategic retreat. Ms. Barnabas, he said carefully. Mr. Yoon, Mira replied with the polite warmth of someone who had all the time in the world. Please, sit down. Byung-chul, standing at the cafe entrance and watching this unfold, reached for his phone with hands that were no longer quite steady. He had spent 15 years building a future on the assumption that Mira Barnabas would stay gone. She had come back, and she had brought receipts. Yoon Dae-jung had negotiated with ministers, outmaneuvered conglomerates, and once convinced a Japanese investment consortium to restructure an entire deal over a single dinner. He was, by any professional measure, a man who performed well under pressure. He had never, however, sat across a table from a woman holding documented evidence of his own wrongdoing, while her 5-year-old children ate quietly beside her, and he discovered, in real time, that this was a pressure category for which his previous experience had not prepared him. He sat. He looked at the envelope. He looked at Mira. He looked at the envelope again. I want to be clear, he began, with the careful tone of a man selecting each word the way you selected footing on uncertain ground, that what occurred 5 years ago was orchestrated, Mira said pleasantly. Yoon paused. Complex. Orchestrated, she repeated, with the same pleasant tone, the way a professor repeats a correct answer to ensure the class has heard it. You coordinated with Seo Byung-chul to stage photographs designed to end my marriage, in exchange for development rights worth approximately 300 million won at the time of the agreement. She tilted her head slightly. I'm happy to use your preferred vocabulary if you can suggest something more accurate. Yoon's jaw moved without producing immediate sound, which was answer enough. Across the table, Kaylin said nothing. He had agreed to say nothing. He was discovering that this was one of the more difficult agreements he had ever honored, but Mira had been right. She was negotiating from patience, and he was negotiating from fury. And fury, in a room this quiet, was the weaker currency. He watched her instead, watched the way she held the table the way she had always held space, without claiming it loudly, simply by being so precisely herself that the room reorganized around her. He had forgotten this about her, or perhaps he had buried it because remembering it made the last 5 years look exactly like what they were. "What do you want?" Yoon asked. He had abandoned the preamble, practical at least. "Accountability," Mira said. "That's not a number." "No," she agreed. "It isn't. Because what I want isn't primarily financial, Mr. Yoon. What I want is for the people in this room to understand the full cost of what was taken." She paused, and her voice remained even, unhurried, built on something solid. A marriage. 5 years of my children's lives without their father. 5 years of his life without his children. The kind of time that doesn't have a market rate because it cannot be returned. She let that sit for a moment. "The document goes to my legal team today, regardless of this conversation. What happens after that depends on decisions made in the next hour." Yoon looked at Kaylin. "You're permitting this?" Kaylin looked back at him with the expression of a man who found the question genuinely interesting. "She doesn't require my permission." Yoon absorbed this, reassessed. Then, turning back to Mira with the slow adjustment of a man accepting new terrain, "What does accountability look like?" "The Incheon rights," Mira said. "Return to CO Group in full with a documented transfer citing conflict of interest in the original acquisition. Publicly filed." She placed one finger on the envelope. "Your signed statement confirming the nature of the 2019 arrangement held by my legal team as security. Not published unless something requires it to be." A pause, and a withdrawal from all current CO-adjacent development bids. Permanently. The table was very quiet. Noah, without looking up from his water glass, said, "She did the same thing when she negotiated our school fees. The other person always goes quiet first, too." Lena patted his hand. Kaylin made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was definitely its immediate neighbor. Yoon looked at the child, then at the mother, then at the ceiling briefly, in the manner of a man having a rapid private conversation with his own choices. Then he looked at Mira. "Byung-chul gets the same terms." "Byung-chul," Hyunja said from her end of the table, speaking for the first time since Yoon had sat down, "is a family matter. He will be handled accordingly." The way she said handled suggested that the word was doing considerable heavy lifting and knew it. "You concern yourself with your own terms." Yoon was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the envelope one final time, the way people looked at things they had spent years hoping didn't exist, and made the only calculation that remained available to him. "I'll have my legal team contact yours by end of day," he said. "By 3 o'clock, Mira said. "That's 3 o'clock," she repeated, with the serenity of someone who had not traveled 5,000 kilometers and waited 5 years to be negotiated into a flexible deadline. Yoon stood. He straightened his jacket with the precision of a man reassembling his dignity piece by piece. He did not offer a handshake. He nodded, once, at Mira, and it contained, buried beneath everything else, the particular acknowledgement of someone who had underestimated an opponent and was now updating their records. He left without looking at Kaylin. Byung-cheol, at the cafe entrance, watched his partner in crime walk past him toward the elevator without stopping. Without a word, without so much as a confirming glance. Byung-cheol understood what that meant. He had spent 15 years reading the movement of people leaving rooms. He knew an exit that was also a surrender when he saw one. He looked into the cafe, found Hyunja's eyes already on him. She did not gesture, did not speak, simply held his gaze with the quiet finality of a woman who had reached the last page of a chapter she intended to close permanently. Byung-cheol left the building 11 minutes later with a single carry bag, which suggested he had, at some point in the last hour, made practical preparations. He had always been practical. It was perhaps the only honest thing about him. The cafe settled. The barista, who had witnessed the most dramatic lunch service of his career and would be describing it in elaborate detail for the next several years, brought the chocolate fondant Jun-ha had ordered and placed it carefully in the center of the table without making eye contact with anyone. Lena looked at the fondant. "It's for sharing," she announced. "Is it?" Kaylin asked. She considered him with the assessment she applied to all structural questions. If everyone shares it equally, it's enough for 5 people. A pause. "There are 5 people." Kaylin looked at her for a moment, this small, precise, serious child who had her mother's jaw and his eyes and an architectural understanding of dessert distribution, and felt something move through him that he did not immediately have a word for. It was located somewhere between grief and gratitude, in the narrow place where those two things discovered they were related. You're right, he said. 5 people, equal shares. Lena nodded, satisfied. She picked up her spoon. Noah picked up his spoon. Kaylin looked at Mira across the table. She was watching him, not with the careful wariness of the plaza, not with the controlled precision of the negotiation. Something quieter. The look of a woman who was still deciding something important and had not yet decided it fully, but was no longer opposed to the process. I know I don't get 48 hours back, Kaylin said, quietly. Just to her, beneath the soft noise of spoons and chocolate and children content with their portion. I know I don't get 5 years back. I'm not asking for that. Mira was still. I'm asking for what's in front of us, he said. Whatever that looks like, however long it takes, whatever conditions you need. He paused. I spent 5 years moving forward without looking at where I actually was. I don't want to do that again. Mira looked at him for a long moment, the look of a woman measuring the load-bearing capacity of something before deciding whether to trust it with any weight. You'd need to prove that, she said finally. Not say it. Prove it. I know. It would take time. I have time. The children come first, in everything, without exception. Yes, he said, without hesitation, the way you agreed to things that were simply true. Mira was quiet for another moment. Then she looked down at the fondant and picked up her spoon. It was not a declaration. It was not a reunion, wrapped in cinematic light with a swelling score underneath. It was a woman picking up a spoon and allowing a man to sit at her table and share a dessert with their children on an October afternoon in Seoul. But Kaylin Seo had spent enough years building things from foundations to understand that this, the quiet agreement, the shared table, the ordinary moment chosen deliberately, was exactly how everything real began. Yunja lifted her spoon and looked around the table at her son, her grandchildren, and the woman who had carried them alone for 5 years and said nothing. She had said enough today. Some moments did not require her management. She simply ate her portion. Outside, Seoul moved through its Saturday afternoon. Traffic and light and people going about the ordinary business of their lives, unbothered by the fact that in a hotel cafe on a corner table, a broken thing was being very carefully, very deliberately, picked back up. Noah scraped the last of the chocolate from his portion and looked at Kaylin with the frank appraisal of a child who had made a decision. You can sit with us tomorrow, too, he said, if you want. Kaylin looked at his son. I want, he said. Lena looked up from her spoon long enough to deliver her verdict. Good, but you should know I notice everything. She returned to her dessert. Just so you know. I'll keep that in mind, Kaylin said seriously. And for the first time in 5 years, in the ruins of a canceled wedding, with a signed confession in his jacket pocket, in a city that had watched him build everything except the thing that mattered, Kaylin Seo smiled.